Black on black crime, boy. One day, we had did some spring cleaning, and we had put a lot of trash out on the curb. And I remember when I was pulling in the driveway, the garbage truck was pulling up to collect all of the garbage that we had put out on the curb. I'll never forget, as I was getting out of the car, these black guys were like, "Hey you, hey," whistling all loud, throwing their hand up over at me, waving me to come to them, So I went over there, I'm like, what's going on, And as I was approaching them, they started saying, "You know what we want, you know what we want." So I'm sitting there looking like, okay, no I don't. What are you guys talking about? And they said, "Well, I figure since you live in this nice house and you put all this extra garbage out here on the curb that you would hook us up." And I said, oh, some money? Is it? Yeah. And I just looked at him, I said, dude, and I'm honest, I didn't have no money on me. I was completely broke. And I opened my wallet, I said, "Man, I don't have any money, man." I said, "See, I don't have anything, man." I said, I just don't have it, And the guys looked at me like, "Oh, man," And I'll never forget, one of the guys had one arm. This dude was looking so crazy at me, and he just started grabbing the bags and was throwing them all in the garbage truck, all mad and crazy, and looking at me at the same time he was doing it. And I remember walking away, and he looking at me just doing this, and they were all looking at me shaking their heads, and I was like, "Oh, man." And I thought to myself, man, why didn't they go and bother my neighbor across the street who are white, or the other white neighbors who always sit a bunch of garbage out on the curb? They never did that to them. But because I was black, they said, "Oh, we can do this to him because we can get away with it." You see, and I'll never forget when I went in the house how I felt. It was like I couldn't call in on them. Because had I got the phone and called about their actions, then guess what? They know where I stay, right? Blacks are made to believe that if they commit a crime against their own, they'll get away with it. There was an article in the Detroit News about prosecutors and detectives not putting forth any effort to catch wanted murderers. It stated how one person that was wanted for murder was actually found at his home address. Blacks are more likely to end up a victim of a heinous crime in his own neighborhood than a foreigner living in the same neighborhood.
We should speak with some of the blacks in the neighborhood to see what they feel about anti-Semitism.
There we interviewed this guy, and he told us if there's gonna be like a Jewish guy and a black guy walking in the street, and somebody wants to rob, they would go for the Jewish guy because he's an easier target.
Actually, no, he's wrong. They will actually go for the black guy because you go for a Jewish guy, you get more time. The lawyers, the judges will actually give us more time if we rob someone of another race.
They're going to classify it as a hate crime.
Blacks rob each other because you get less time.
Yahweh shall cause thee to be smitten before thine enemies. Thou shalt go out one way against them, and flee 7 ways before them, and shalt be removed into all the kingdoms of the earth. And thy carcass shall be meat unto all fowls of the air, and unto the beasts of the earth, and no man shall fray them away.
Isn't this what happened during the time of slavery? We were smitten before our enemies. We fled 7 different ways. They caught us and shipped us as slaves all over the world.
Yahweh shall smite thee with madness and blindness and astonishment of heart, and thou shalt grope at noonday as the blind gropes in darkness, and thou shalt not prosper in thy ways, and thou shalt be only oppressed and spoiled evermore, and no man shall save thee.
I made a decision that we should talk to the public about it. I felt they had a right to know, and that was probably the beginning of the massive media coverage. Its use has reached epidemic proportions.
The word epidemic.
Officials call it an epidemic.
You start to hear words like epidemic. You start to hear words like plague, and it fed the public imagination.
At this point, crack is still only in a few neighborhoods of a few big cities.
Most people in America had no idea what crack was. They'd never seen it. But the news media was writing about this plague before the plague, as it were, ever really took hold.
By the summer of '86, crack is the biggest story since Watergate.
You couldn't pick up a newspaper in the mid-'80s where the word crack wasn't on every page. I mean, you'd hit the sports page, it would be Yankees 4, crack 3. Tomorrow the weather's going to be 80 degrees with a slight chance of crack. You know, it's just crack, crack, crack.
That's what the media does, man. They take something and they run with it for the controversy of it so that they can get the numbers and the ratings.
From the beginning, there are plenty of white people smoking crack.
It was really the first time I smoked it that I knew I didn't want to stop.
Everybody I used with was white. You know, they didn't get caught because they had money, more money than me. They weren't in the street yet.
But the media focuses almost exclusively on the black neighborhoods.
Drug dealing has reached epidemic proportions among young black men here.
How old are you? 16, sir.
Our television sets were saturated with images of, black men in handcuffs.
It fed into the worst fears that people had, not just about the drug, but about who the drug was associated with.
The idea of a threat coming from black America relative to crack cocaine was to create a sort of massive hysteria.
It's going nationwide, especially among the young.
If smaller cities don't have a crack crisis now, they will soon.
Now it's spreading across the nation.
Crack has become America's drug of choice.
Perhaps the exclamation point on all of that was the death of Len Bias.
Just 48 hours after becoming the #1 draft choice of the world champion Boston Celtics, Bias collapsed of an apparent heart attack on the University of Maryland campus.
Here he is celebrating, and he dies of a cocaine overdose. No doubt that shook people up.
Leonard Bias was a very healthy individual.
The cocaine killed him, period.
That's correct.
The dramatic warning that, in fact, cocaine kills. Even the young and the strong can be its victims.
No one actually knew what kind of cocaine he was taking, but because he was an African American, the assumption was that it was crack cocaine.
A specialist in sports medicine speculated what could have occurred.
Somebody substituted crack, a very potent form, and he thought he was getting lower doses than he was given.
Crack, cocaine, whatever had been involved for the media, the facts didn't matter very much.
An autopsy will eventually show that Len Bias ingested cocaine powder, but the public will always think he was killed by crack.
Because it was so geographically close to the Capitol, it kind of had greater reverberations than perhaps it otherwise would have. So I remember members of Congress saying, we gotta do something.
Larger numbers of our citizens are suffering and dying from this threat to our national security than any nuclear warfare, any chemical warfare waged on any battlefield.
All of this plays right into President Ronald Reagan's hands. Already 4 years into a mounting war on drugs, he seizes the moment to address the nation.
Today, there's a new epidemic. Smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack. It is an explosively destructive and often lethal substance which is crushing its users. It is an uncontrolled fire.
With Election Day approaching and polls showing that drug abuse is the public's #1 concern, today's voting became a contest to determine who could be toughest on drug traffickers.
The Republicans in the White House led the way, but Democrats were up there yelling and screaming and pushing for tougher laws.
Tip O'Neill was the Speaker of the House, and he said, you know what, we're going to start punishing crack more than we punish powder. Chemically, they're indistinguishable, but you should be punished a lot more for crack.
There should be no mercy on them.
So he said, I think that the disparity should be 25 to 1. So for every 1 gram of crack, you should get the same punishment as 25 grams of powder. The Republicans said, no, we're the tough on crime people. We think it should be 50 to 1. Tip O'Neill said 75 to 1. Republicans said, no, 100 to 1. That's how drug policy gets made.
We're getting tough on drugs, and we mean business. For those who are thinking of using drugs, we say stop. And to those who are pushing drugs, we say beware.
The Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986 mandates a 5-year minimum sentence for a mere 5 grams of crack. It means that first-time nonviolent offenders will be sentenced to decades in prison for selling or possessing small amounts of the drug.
It was really very much about demonization. Every society needs its boogeyman. In the 1980s, it became the crackheads, the drug dealers, and the rhetoric was essentially that anybody involved in this was less than human, was a devil, was somebody who needed to be destroyed.
Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but thou shalt not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity.
But this people robbed and spoiled. They are all of them snared in holes. They are hid in prison houses. They are for a prey, and none delivereth. For a spoil, and none saith, restore. Isaiah chapter 42, verse 22.
How many of our sons and daughters have been sent to prison for minor charges or for crimes they didn't even commit? According to the Huffington Post, there are more black men in prison today than were enslaved in 1850. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution states that slavery is abolished unless punishment for a crime. Well, no wonder there are so many blacks in slavery, in prison today. More than it was in 1850.
I'm Megan Murphy for the Huffington Post. More black men are in prison today than were enslaved in 1850. That's the word from Ohio State law professor Michelle Alexander, who's promoting her book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. News One reports, according to U.S. Bureau of Justice estimates, as of 2008, more than 846,000 black men were in U.S. prisons, constituting 40.2% of all inmates in the system. In an interview with the Washington Journal, Alexander argues the incarceration rate for black men is just a new way to discriminate.
It's no longer appropriate or acceptable to use race as explicitly as a justification for discrimination. Instead, today we label people of color criminals, primarily through the war on drugs. We label them felons, and then engage in all the practices we supposedly left behind.
LA Progressive reports the numbers back up Alexander's theory. Even though studies have shown that whites use and sell illegal drugs at rates equal to or above blacks, in some black inner-city communities, 4 of 5 black youth can expect to be caught up in the criminal justice system during their lifetimes.
You know, the Most High said that he was going to appoint terror over us. You see, when we had an opportunity to do right, we chose not to do right. So he appointed terror over us. He said he's going to put us in a land where the land of our enemies were going to eat us up. This is why you see the police brutality that's going on. Now, many of us, we look at these things and it really hurts us to see these things happening to our people. But we have to understand why these things are happening. Historically, if the children of Israel were out of order, the Most High would pour out a judgment on them. You see? And through the Christian church, we've been taught lies to where we think, oh, as many times as we sin, he will forgive us and all of this fluffy stuff. But when you look at the reality of things, the prophecies that were put forth in Scripture, they are coming to pass just like the Most High said they would. He said, my word is going forth out of my mouth and it will not return void. So we continue to see our young people dying in the streets because there is a continuance of disobedience. This terror that he's appointed over us, of course, there is a time of deliverance at hand, but we as a people, if we want to see things change, we have got to repent. This is why we have to get in the Word and understand who is talking about in certain passages. You see, we've been told through Christianity that certain things don't matter. That's not true. There are things that do matter, and you simply cannot ignore these things. Understand who a certain passage or verse or chapter is talking about and who it's talking to. Because all of this stuff about it don't matter, yes it does. That's why you see our young people dying out in the streets.
Shh, the lawyer speaking.
It's important in the midst of all the public vilifying of the police department, whose members acted completely within procedure, to remember Mr. McQuillan was no angel.
What?
What does that mean?
Why would they even say that? What does that even mean?
Talking about somebody's child. That could easily be one of these children here.
That could have been one of us.
No,
Yes.
sweetie, no. Because if you get stopped by the cops, you are gonna do exactly what they say, okay?
She's right. Listen to me. If you have to talk to the cops, there's only 7 words you need to know. Yes, sir. No, sir. And thank you, sir.
Exactly. You make sure you live to fight your case in court. You hear me?
Oh, Mama! Enough! Wake up! Let's say they listen to the cops and get in the car. Look what happened to Freddie Gray.
Yeah, and what if they make it all the way to the station? You remember Sandra Bland?
And let's say they do make it to trial. You see where that gets us? Don't you get it, Bo? The system is rigged against us.
Maybe it is, Dre. But I don't want to feel like my kids are living in a world that is so flawed that they can't have any hope.
Oh, so you want to talk about hope, Bo? Obama ran on hope. Remember when he got elected? And we felt like maybe, just maybe, we got out of that bad place and made it to a good place. That the whole country was really ready to turn the corner. You remember that amazing feeling we had during the inauguration? I was sitting right next to you. And we were so proud. And we saw him get out of that limo and walk alongside of it and wave to that crowd. Tell me you weren't terrified when you saw that. Tell me you weren't worried that someone was going to snatch that hope away from us like they always do. That is the real world, Bo. And our children need to know that that's the world that they live in.